Have you ever witnessed a moment of shocking disrespect and wished you could see justice delivered instantly? This isn't just a story about a rude flight attendant. It's about a colossal misjudgment that led to a career-ending catastrophe. It's about a quiet, unassuming passenger who held the power to shatter the world of the woman who scorned her. On Apex Air Flight 710, high above the Atlantic, a senior flight attendant made a decision fueled by prejudice, ordering a black woman to wait her turn. She was about to learn a lesson in humility from the most unexpected source possible. With a single sentence that would trigger an investigation, unravel a web of lies, and prove that karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. The cabin of Apex Air's flagship Boeing 777 was a meticulously curated theater of luxury. The scent of worn leather and expensive perfume mingled with the faint, sterile tang of recycled air. For the occupants of first class on the overnight flight from New York's JFK to London Heathrow, this was a familiar sanctuary, a hushed, cream and charcoal cocoon designed to insulate them from the mundane realities of travel. Dr. Amelia Vance settled into seat 2A, the supple leather sighing under her weight. She was dressed in a simple but elegant pair of grey trousers and a cashmere sweater, her only jewellery a modest silver watch. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and a pair of unassuming glasses rested on her nose as she perused a thick binder filled with aeronautical engineering schematics. To the casual observer, she was perhaps a professor, an architect, or a mid-level executive, someone successful enough for a comfortable seat, but not so ostentatious as to command immediate attention. This anonymity was precisely what she sought. For the past 6 months, Dr. Vance had been the CEO of Apex Air, a position she had earned after a grueling, meteoric rise through the corporate ranks of the aviation industry. Today, she was flying incognito, a secret shopper in her own kingdom, determined to experience her airline not from the boardroom, but from a passenger's perspective. The cabin crew began their pre-flight dance, a choreography of practiced smiles and graceful movements. One flight attendant, a younger woman with bright, earnest eyes named Grace Peterson, offered Amelia a glass of champagne with a genuine warmth that made her smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I get you anything else before we take off?" Amelia thanked her graciously, taking note of the young woman's name tag. Grace. Good start, she thought, making a mental note. Then, Brenda Jenkins entered the scene. Brenda was the purser, the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin, and she moved with an air of proprietorship that bordered on arrogance. She was in her late 40s, with a severe blonde bob and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She had been with the airline for over 20 years, a tenure she wore like a shield, believing it made her untouchable. Brenda's eyes swept across the cabin, performing a rapid, subconscious triage of the passengers. Her gaze lingered on the hedge fund manager in 3K with the Patek Philippe watch, offering him an obsequious, "Mr. Harrison, so wonderful to have you back with us." She fawned over the actress in 1D, laughing a little too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. When her eyes passed over Amelia, however, they barely registered. There was a flicker of something, assessment, dismissal, and then she moved on. Amelia was accustomed to it. In a world that often equated power with a specific look, usually white, usually male, she had long ago learned to use her perceived invisibility as a tool. It allowed her to observe people as they truly were when their guards were down. The first subtle sign of Brenda's disposition came during the distribution of amenity kits. She moved down the aisle, handing out the small designer leather pouches with a flourish. When she reached Amelia's seat, she didn't make eye contact. She simply placed the kit on the empty seat beside her and continued on her way, a stark contrast to the personalized service she'd offered others. Amelia said nothing, merely observing. As the plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed and the dinner service began. Grace took Amelia's order with the same pleasant efficiency as before. But it was Brenda who served the main course. When she placed the plate of pan-seared halibut before Amelia, a small drop of sauce sloshed onto the crisp white tablecloth. "Oh," Amelia said quietly, pointing to the spot. Brenda glanced down, her expression one of pure annoyance. Without a word of apology, she took a napkin, roughly dabbed at the stain, and walked away, leaving the soiled linen on the table. Amelia watched her go, a deep frown creasing her brow. This wasn't just a lapse in service. It was a deliberate act of disrespect. It was a message. You are not worth my time or my courtesy. Across the aisle, Mr. Harrison Cole, the hedge fund manager, was holding court, complaining loudly about the wine selection. For a transatlantic first class, I expect a better vintage of Bordeaux. This is simply adequate. Brenda was at his side in an instant, her face a mask of apologetic concern. I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Harrison. You are absolutely right. Let me see if we have something else in reserve. Sometimes they stock a special selection for our most valued flyers. Amelia listened to the exchange, the contrast in treatment a glaring indictment. She made a precise, detailed note in a small black notebook she'd taken from her bag. Purser, Brenda Jenkins, differential treatment of passengers, rude handling of minor service issue, fawning over passenger in 3K while dismissing passenger in 2A. Later, as the meal service concluded, Amelia wanted to ask a question about the in-flight Wi-Fi, which had been cutting out. She saw Brenda speaking with Grace near the forward galley. Amelia pressed her call button. The light pinged softly, illuminating above her seat. 1 minute passed, then 2. Brenda continued her conversation with Grace, occasionally glancing down the aisle, her eyes sweeping right past the illuminated call light as if it were invisible. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity in the silent cabin. Amelia could feel a slow burn of anger, not for herself, but for the principle of the matter. Any passenger, regardless of who they were, deserved a response. This was the premium cabin of her airline, the jewel in its crown, and this employee was actively tarnishing it. Finally, seeing that Brenda had no intention of responding, Amelia unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She walked calmly toward the galley, her binder of schematics left on her seat. The storm was gathering, and Brenda Jenkins, blissfully unaware, was standing directly in its path. The galley was a tight, stainless steel corridor, bathed in a low, clinical light. It smelled of coffee and reheated bread rolls. Brenda was leaning against a counter, mid-sentence, her tone dripping with disdain as she spoke to the younger flight attendant, Grace. And then he has the nerve to ask for a specific brand of sparkling water. As if this is his private jet, Brenda was saying, rolling her eyes. Some people just have no idea. Grace, looking uncomfortable, caught a glimpse of Amelia approaching from behind Brenda, and her expression tightened. She tried to subtly signal to her superior, but Brenda was too absorbed in her own monologue. "Excuse me," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through Brenda's complaint. Brenda turned, her body language radiating irritation at being interrupted. Her eyes did a quick up-and-down scan of Amelia, and a sneer tugged at the corner of her lips. It was the look of someone who had already decided another person was beneath them. "The call light is on," Brenda stated flatly, not as a question, but as an accusation. "I was going to get to it. We're very busy." The galley was empty, save for the 3 of them. The lie was as transparent as it was insulting. "You've been standing here for over 5 minutes," Amelia replied, her tone even. "My light has been on for longer. I just had a simple question about the Wi-Fi connection." Brenda let out a short, incredulous laugh. She folded her arms across her chest, a classic power stance designed to intimidate. "Look, I am the purser on this flight. I manage the service flow. When I am finished with my current tasks, I will address the call bells. You need to go back to your seat and wait. We'll get to you when we can." The condescension was palpable. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Grace stood frozen, her eyes wide, darting between the two women. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Amelia held Brenda's gaze, refusing to be dismissed. "Your current task appears to be gossiping about passengers. My question would have taken you 10 seconds to answer." Brenda's face hardened, her professional veneer cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. "I don't know who you think you are, but you don't get to tell me how to do my job. Now, I'm going to say this one more time. Go back to your seat. People like you need to learn to wait your turn." There it was. The final, unforgivable line. "People like you." The 3 words struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow, not because they hurt her feelings. She had developed an armor of steel over the years, but because of what they represented. It was the casual, venomous bigotry that she had fought against her entire career. It was the rot she was determined to excise from her company. It was the reason she was on this flight in the first place. A profound silence descended upon the galley. The only sound was the omnipresent hum of the engines, a constant reminder that they were suspended 7 miles above the earth in a pressurized tube where civility was supposed to be the governing law. Grace's face had gone pale. She knew a line had just been crossed, a point of no return. Amelia's demeanor shifted. The quiet observer vanished, replaced by the formidable CEO. Her posture straightened, and an almost imperceptible coldness entered her eyes. The quiet anger that had been simmering within her now coalesced into a sharp, focused resolve. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words, when they came, were quiet, precise, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "What is your full name and employee number?" she asked. Brenda scoffed, emboldened by what she mistook for a hollow threat. "You think you're going to report me? Go ahead. Write a letter. It'll end up in a pile with all the others from entitled passengers who think a first-class ticket buys them the right to be abusive to the staff." She pointed a finger toward the cabin. "Now, for the last time, get out of my galley." "I'm not asking again," Amelia said, her voice dropping a register, now laced with an unmistakable edge of command. "Your name and employee number. Now." Brenda's arrogance was a formidable fortress, but even she could sense the shift in power. This was not the reaction of a disgruntled passenger. This was something else. Still, she couldn't bring herself to back down. Her pride wouldn't allow it. "It's Brenda Jenkins," she snapped, "and you don't need my number. If you have a complaint, you can tell them it was the purser on Flight 710 to Heathrow on September 6th. They'll know who I am." Her tone implied a challenge, a belief in her own untouchability. "Oh, I know they will," Amelia replied softly. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but it was devoid of humor. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. "And you are absolutely right about one thing. I do not get to tell you how to do your job." She paused, letting the words hang in the air for a beat. "Because you will no longer have a job to do." The sheer audacity of the statement stunned Brenda into silence. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then annoyance, What did you just say to me? Are you threatening me? Who in the hell do you think you are? This was the moment, the flashpoint, the culmination of a flight's worth of slights and a career's worth of prejudice. Amelia stood tall in the narrow galley, the embodiment of the very power Brenda had so arrogantly claimed for herself. Amelia Vance took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing the tense energy of the galley into herself and exhaling pure, cold authority. She looked directly into Brenda Jenkins's defiant eyes, the same eyes that had dismissed her just moments before. "You asked me who I think I am," Amelia began, her voice retaining its unnerving calm. "It's a fair question. You've made several assumptions about me tonight, Brenda. You assumed I was unimportant. You assumed I was ignorant. You assumed I was someone who would simply endure your contempt and say nothing." She took a step forward, closing the small distance between them. Brenda instinctively took a step back, her back hitting the cold metal of a beverage cart. For the first time, a genuine seed of doubt, of fear, began to sprout in the barren ground of her arrogance. "My name," Amelia said, enunciating each syllable with perfect clarity, "is Dr. Amelia Vance." The name meant nothing to Brenda. She stared blankly, her mind racing. Was this some lawyer? A government official? A well-known journalist? Amelia saw the confusion and continued, her gaze unwavering. "I don't just have a seat on this airplane. I don't just have a complaint to file. You see, I have a vested interest in the performance of every single employee on this aircraft, from the captain in the cockpit to the crew cleaning the lavatories." Brenda's defiant posture began to crumble. Her arms, which had been crossed so belligerently, fell limply to her sides. She glanced at Grace, who was now pressed against the far wall, looking as if she'd witnessed a ghost. "So, to answer your question," Amelia concluded, delivering the fatal blow, "as for who I am, I run this airline." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the earlier quiet, thick with the deafening sound of a reality shattering. The hum of the engine seemed to fade into nothingness. Brenda's face went through a rapid, devastating transformation. First, there was blank incomprehension, her brain refusing to process the words. Then came a wave of shocked disbelief, her mouth opening slightly as if to form a word that wouldn't come. Finally, this gave way to the pale, sickly green of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a ghastly, waxen complexion. Her carefully constructed world of seniority and untouchability had not just been cracked, it had been vaporized in a single sentence. She stared at Amelia, really seeing her for the first time. The simple clothes no longer looked plain. They looked like the confident choice of someone who had nothing to prove. The calm demeanor was not weakness. It was the placid surface of a deep and powerful ocean. The woman she had dismissed as a nuisance was the chief executive officer of Apex Air. "No," Brenda whispered, the word a desperate, broken puff of air. You're lying." But she knew it was the truth. The certainty in Amelia's eyes was absolute. Amelia simply raised an eyebrow. "Do you really want to gamble your career on that assumption, Brenda? After all the other poor assumptions you've made tonight?" Brenda began to stammer, her mind a frantic scramble of damage control. The sneering, condescending purser was gone, replaced by a panicked, groveling subordinate. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. It was a misunderstanding. I'm under a lot of stress. This has been a very difficult flight." The excuses were pathetic, and they both knew it. A misunderstanding? Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "Telling a passenger that people like you need to wait their turn is not a misunderstanding. It is a clear statement of your prejudice. Ignoring a call light is not a sign of stress. It is a willful neglect of duty. Your behavior tonight was not an anomaly, was it, Brenda? I suspect it's a pattern. She turned her head slightly to look at Grace, who was still frozen against the wall. Grace, Amelia said, her tone softening fractionally. Did you witness this exchange? Grace swallowed hard, her eyes wide with fear, not of Amelia, but of the career-ending maelstrom she had just witnessed. She could only manage a shaky nod. Did you hear Purser Jenkins tell me that people like you need to learn to wait? Another nod, more definite this time. Amelia turned back to Brenda, whose face was now a mask of pleading desperation. Please, Dr. Vance, I apologize. I swear it will never happen again. I've been with this airline for 22 years. My entire life is with Apex Air. Please don't do this. 22 years, Amelia repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. That means for 22 years, you have been a representative of this company. For 22 years, passengers have been in your care. And I have to wonder, how many of them have you treated with the same contempt you showed me tonight? How many people have left our flights feeling disrespected, unwelcome and unseen because of you? She didn't wait for an answer. She reached for the in-flight satellite phone, which was mounted on the galley wall. Her movements were calm and efficient. I'm not threatening your job anymore, Brenda, she said, quietly, as she dialed a number from memory. I'm ending it. Brenda let out a small, choked sob. The sound was swallowed by the first ring of the phone. The unveiling was complete. The power dynamic had been irrevocably inverted, and for Brenda Jenkins, the long, terrifying fall had just begun. The satellite phone was answered on the second ring. A calm, professional male voice came through the receiver. Maxwell. Robert, it's Amelia Vance. There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind that indicated surprise at receiving a call from the CEO via a sat phone at what would be the middle of the night on the East Coast. Amelia? Is everything all right? Is there an issue with the flight? The flight is fine, Robert. The issue is with a member of the cabin crew, Amelia said, her eyes still locked on Brenda, who was visibly trembling. I'm on flight 710, JFK to LHR. I need you to be at the gate when we land at Heathrow. Arrange for airport security and our head of London operations to be with you. Of course, Robert Maxwell, the airline's COO, replied without hesitation. He knew Amelia well enough to understand that a request like this was not made lightly. Can you give me a name? Brenda Jenkins. She's the purser in the first-class cabin, Amelia stated. She is to be met at the jet bridge, have her credentials revoked, and be escorted from the airport premises. Her employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective immediately upon landing. A choked gasp escaped Brenda's lips. The finality in Amelia's tone was brutal. This wasn't a suspension pending investigation. It was a summary execution of her career. Understood, Maxwell said. I'll make the arrangements. I'm booking a flight to London now. I'll be there to oversee it myself. Good. I also want you to pull her entire service record. Every commendation, every complaint, every peer review. I want a complete file on my desk before my own flight back to New York tomorrow afternoon. It will be done, Amelia. Thank you, Robert. She hung up the phone, placing it back in its cradle with a definitive click. The sound echoed in the tiny galley, a punctuation mark on Brenda's professional life. The fight had gone out of her completely, replaced by a hollow, vacant despair. The 22 years she had clung to as a badge of honor had evaporated in a 2-minute phone call. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Dr. Vance, Amelia, please, my retirement, my pension, 22 years. You should have thought about your 22 years before you decided your prejudice was more important than your professionalism, Amelia retorted, her patience exhausted. You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. Go to the crew rest area and stay there until we land. Grace will manage the first-class cabin. If you attempt to speak to another passenger or interfere with the crew in any way, I will have the captain confine you. She then turned to the terrified junior attendant. Grace, she said, her voice now much softer, more reassuring. I know this has been difficult to witness. I need you to take over as a lead for this cabin. Can you do that? Grace, still pale, straightened up and nodded. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Vance, I can. In her eyes there was a mixture of fear and a dawning sense of respect. She had just witnessed an unprecedented display of leadership. Good, Amelia said with an encouraging nod. Just focus on providing our passengers with the excellent service they deserve. We will speak on the ground. Brenda, looking utterly defeated, gave one last, pleading look at Amelia. Seeing no hint of reprieve in the CEO's stern expression, she turned and stumbled out of the galley, disappearing through the curtain that led to the crew's private quarters. Her exit was not that of a proud purser, but of a disgraced spectre. Amelia returned to her seat. The atmosphere in the cabin had subtly changed. Mr. Harrison in 3K, who had been loudly demanding a different blanket, had fallen silent. The exchange in the galley, though quiet, had not gone completely unnoticed. Whispers and curious glances followed Amelia as she sat down. She ignored them, picking up her binder of schematics and pretending to read, though her mind was racing. This was not a victory she savored. It was a messy, unpleasant, but necessary act of corporate hygiene. Brenda was not just an individual employee. She was a symptom of a cultural problem that could fester if left unchecked. A single flight attendant like her could undo millions of dollars in marketing and brand building with a few contemptuous words. For the next 4 hours, Grace performed her duties with a newfound, albeit nervous, diligence. She was attentive, professional, and unfailingly polite to every passenger, including Amelia, whom she now addressed with a quiet "ma'am" and wide, respectful eyes. The rest of the flight was an exercise in extreme tension. The quiet hum of the engines seemed to amplify the unspoken drama that had unfolded. As the plane began its final descent into London, the early morning sun glinting off its wings, Amelia looked out the window. The neatly gridded streets and green parks of the city spread out below. Landing was not just the end of a flight, it was the beginning of the reckoning. For Brenda Jenkins, it was the end of a career. For Amelia Vance, it was the start of a difficult but essential mission to ensure that no passenger on her airline ever again had to hear the words, "People like you." The seatbelt sign chimed its final, melodic warning. The wheels touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow with a gentle bump, signaling their arrival and the start of the real fallout on the ground. The moment the Boeing 777 docked with the jet bridge at Terminal 3, a palpable sense of finality settled over the aircraft. While the other passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering their belongings, a different kind of ceremony was about to unfold at the front of the plane. Amelia remained in her seat, watching the main cabin door. She had instructed the captain, via a note passed by Grace, that no one was to deplane until she gave the signal. As the engines spooled down into silence, the cabin door was opened by the ground crew. Standing just inside the jet bridge, as promised, was Robert Maxwell. The COO was a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression grim and all business. Flanking him were 2 uniformed airport security officers and a severe-looking woman Amelia recognized as Eleanor Vance, Apex Air's station manager for Heathrow. Amelia gave a slight nod to Grace, who was standing nervously by the door. Grace understood. She walked to the curtain leading to the crew rest area and opened it. "Brenda," she said softly. "We've landed. They're here for you." A moment later, Brenda Jenkins emerged. The 4 hours of seclusion had not been kind to her. Her face was puffy and blotched, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her uniform, once a symbol of her authority, now looked like a costume on a defeated actor. She walked down the aisle like a condemned prisoner on her final walk, avoiding the curious and pitying glances of the first-class passengers. When she reached the front of the plane, she saw Robert Maxwell and the security detail, and any lingering, desperate hope she might have had was extinguished. This was real. "Brenda Jenkins." Robert's voice was cold and devoid of emotion. She could only nod, unable to speak. "On behalf of Apex Air, I am informing you that your employment is terminated for gross misconduct, effective immediately," he stated formally. "Please surrender your employee ID, your cabin keys, and any other company property." With trembling hands, Brenda fumbled with the lanyard around her neck. She unclipped her ID badge, the plastic card that had given her access, authority, and identity for over 2 decades, and handed it to Eleanor Vance. The station manager took it without a word, her expression unreadable. "You will be escorted from the airport," Robert continued. "Your personal belongings will be collected from your locker and shipped to your home address. You are not to contact any active Apex Air employees. A formal package detailing the terms of your separation will be sent to you via courier. Do you understand?" Again, Brenda could only manage a pathetic, jerky nod. The humiliation was absolute. She was being stripped of her career in full view of the passengers she once lorded over and the crew she once commanded. Mr. Harrison Cole watched the entire spectacle with wide, astonished eyes, the complaint about his Bordeaux now seeming laughably trivial. One of the security officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, please come with us." Brenda took one last look into the aircraft, her former domain. Her eyes met Amelia's for a fleeting second. In them was a toxic cocktail of hatred, despair, and a horrifying sliver of understanding. She had picked a fight with the one person she could never, ever beat. Then she turned and was escorted down the jet bridge, a disgraced figure disappearing from the life she had known. Once she was gone, Amelia finally stood up. She nodded to Robert. "Thank you for handling that so swiftly, Robert." "Of course, Amelia," he said, stepping aboard. "I've booked us a conference room at the arrivals lounge. The file you requested is being compiled as we speak. Preliminary findings are troubling." Amelia wasn't surprised. "I expected as much." She turned to Grace, who was trying to make herself as small as possible. "Grace, a word, please." The young flight attendant approached, wringing her hands. "Dr. Vance, You did a fine job under difficult circumstances," Amelia said, cutting her off gently. "I need you to write a detailed, honest report of everything you witnessed tonight, both in the galley and any other interactions you observed. Do not omit anything. Your honesty is valued, and it will be protected. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Grace said, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thank you." "There's no need to thank me for expecting you to do the right thing," Amelia replied with a small smile. "Go get some rest. We'll be in touch." As Amelia and Robert walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal, the full weight of the incident began to settle. Firing one employee was simple, but Brenda Jenkins was a 22-year veteran. How had a person with such a deeply ingrained prejudice been allowed to hold a senior, customer-facing position for so long? Who had enabled her? Who had ignored the complaints that must have been filed against her over the years? "The preliminary findings you mentioned," Amelia said as they walked. "What have you found?" Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's worse than just a few passenger complaints. We've already found 3 formal grievances filed by junior flight attendants against her in the last 5 years alone, all citing bullying, discriminatory language, and creating a hostile work environment." "And what happened with them?" Amelia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "All 3 were dismissed by her direct supervisor, a man named Martin Webb. He cited Brenda's impeccable 2-decade record and labeled the junior staff as overly sensitive and unable to handle the pressures of the job." Amelia stopped walking, her eyes hardening. "And where are those 3 flight attendants now?" Robert's expression was grim. "None of them are still with the airline. They all resigned within 6 months of their complaints being dismissed." There it was. The rot. It went deeper than just one flight attendant. It was systemic. Brenda wasn't an isolated case. She was a symptom of a culture that protected seniority over decency, a culture that silenced victims and enabled bullies. "Get me everything you can on Martin Webb," Amelia ordered. "I want to know who he is, who he answers to, and why he thought it was acceptable to bury these complaints. It seems my work here is just beginning." The grounding of Brenda Jenkins was not the end of the story. It was merely the first decisive battle in a much larger war. The emergency conference room at Heathrow was a sterile, windowless box, but for the next several hours it became Apex Air's war room, with Robert Maxwell coordinating on the ground and a team back in New York digging through digital archives. The professional life of Brenda Jenkins was being dissected with forensic precision. What they uncovered was far more damning than a single, ugly incident of racism. It was a mosaic of deceit, malice, and systemic failure. The first file to come through was Brenda's complete complaint history. There were 17 formal passenger complaints over the last decade. They painted a stark picture. A disproportionate number came from minority passengers, all detailing similar experiences: dismissive attitudes, rude service, and a general air of contempt. Each one was followed by a formal response from Brenda, full of righteous indignation, often flipping the script to accuse the passenger of being demanding or aggressive. And every single one had been signed off on and dismissed by Martin Webb, her longtime supervisor. Then came the internal grievances from former flight attendants. Robert read excerpts aloud, his voice tight with anger. One was from a young Hispanic woman named Sofia Ramirez. Brenda constantly mocked my accent in the galley, telling me to speak English properly if I wanted to keep my job. She would assign me the most difficult tasks and then berate me in front of other crew members when I struggled to keep up. When I reported it to Mr. Webb, he told me I needed to toughen up and that Brenda was just old school. Another was from a black flight attendant, David Chen, who detailed how Brenda would make comments about his affirmative action hiring and consistently passed him over for opportunities to work in the premium cabins. His complaint, too, was dismissed by Webb as a personality conflict. But the true bombshell, the twist that turned this from a simple firing into a major corporate scandal, came from a deeper dive into Brenda's original hiring documents from 22 years ago. An eagle-eyed analyst in HR, tasked with scanning the decades-old paperwork, noticed an anomaly. Brenda's application stated she had a bachelor's degree in hospitality management from Cornell University, a prestigious program. On a hunch, the analyst ran a verification check. Robert's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. He handed the phone to Amelia. It was an email from the head of HR. The subject line read, "Urgent. B. Jenkins credential discrepancy. The body of the email was short and brutal. Cornell University has no record of a Brenda Jenkins graduating or ever attending their School of Hotel Administration. Her degree is fraudulent. Amelia stared at the phone. This changed everything. Brenda Jenkins hadn't just been a prejudiced employee. She was a fraud. Her entire 22-year career, her seniority, her position as a purser, it was all built on a fundamental lie. This wasn't just grounds for termination. It was grounds for legal action. The airline could potentially sue to claw back wages and pension contributions paid under false pretenses. The union, which might have put up a fight for a long-serving member fired over a passenger dispute, would be powerless to defend a case of outright fraud. "This is the karma," Amelia whispered, more to herself than to Robert. "It's not just that she got fired. It's that the lie she built her life on has completely unraveled." The investigation immediately pivoted to Martin Webb. Who was this manager who had so diligently protected a fraudulent and abusive employee for years? They pulled his records. It turned out Webb had been the hiring manager who first interviewed and recommended Brenda 22 years ago. His entire managerial career had been intertwined with hers. Protecting Brenda was, in essence, protecting his own flawed judgment from decades prior. Admitting she was a problem would be admitting he had made a catastrophic hiring error. So, he had buried the complaints, pushed out the accusers, and perpetuated the lie. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, Amelia made another call, this time to the head of the flight attendants' union. She laid out the facts coldly and clearly. The documented abuse, the pattern of bigotry, the multiple complaints from other union members that were squashed, and the final unassailable proof of credential fraud. The union representative, who had initially been preparing for a fight, was left speechless. There would be no grievance filed. Brenda Jenkins was on her own. The hard karma was hitting back, and it was relentless. Within hours, Brenda's life had been systematically dismantled. She was jobless, stripped of the pension she had been counting on. She was now unhireable in the industry, her name permanently blacklisted. Worse, she was facing the humiliating prospect of legal action from the company she had served for more than 2 decades. Her reputation was in tatters, her future a terrifying blank. The news of the fraud spread like wildfire among the Apex aircrews. The flight attendants who had been bullied into silence by Brenda and Webb suddenly found their voices. Grace Peterson's formal, detailed statement about the events on Flight 710 was now just one piece of a much larger puzzle. 2 of the 3 flight attendants who had been forced to resign came forward, willing to testify about their experiences now that they knew they would be heard. The dominoes were falling, and they were falling fast. The focus was no longer just on the disgraced purser, who was now stranded in London, unable to even fly home on her own airline. The spotlight had turned to the system that had allowed her to thrive for so long, and at the center of that system was Martin Webb. His reckoning was coming next. The day after the incident on Flight 710, Amelia Vance walked through the glass doors of Apex Air's gleaming New York headquarters, not as an anonymous passenger, but as its chief executive, radiating a focused intensity that was palpable to everyone she passed. The story of what had happened at 38,000 feet had already begun to circulate through the corporate grapevine, a sensational tale of a CEO in disguise and a purser's spectacular fall from grace. But Amelia was not interested in the mythology of the event. She was interested in wielding it as a scalpel to excise the cancer she had discovered in the heart of her own company. Her first meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main executive boardroom. When Martin Webb arrived, he carried with him the weary but confident air of a man who believed he was coming to help manage a minor crisis. He was a portly man in his late 50s, his suit slightly too tight, his face florid. He had spent years navigating corporate politics, and he viewed this summons as another fire to be calmly extinguished with a few well-placed apologies and promises of internal review. He entered the boardroom, a placating smile on his face, ready to perform. The smile froze and died on his lips. The room was cold and silent. Dr. Amelia Vance sat at the head of the vast mahogany table. To her right sat Robert Maxwell, the COO, his expression as hard as granite. Between them lay a thick binder, its white spine stark against the dark wood. The label, printed in bold black letters, read, "Jenkins, B. Webb, M. A pattern of systemic failure." "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming," Amelia began, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Please have a seat." Webb sat down heavily, his earlier confidence visibly draining away, replaced by a nervous apprehension. He was no longer a manager coming to consult. He was a suspect arriving for an interrogation. "I assume you've been briefed on the incident aboard Flight 710, Amelia continued, her eyes locking onto his. "Yes, Dr. Vance. A terrible, terrible incident," Webb said, his voice now slick with feigned concern. "I was absolutely horrified when I heard. Brenda's behavior was inexcusable, and I want to assure you that I would have taken the sternest disciplinary action. She has been a problematic employee at times. But this—" "Stop," Amelia said. The single word cut through his practiced speech like a shard of glass. "Let's not begin this meeting with a lie, Mr. Webb. Brenda Jenkins wasn't problematic at times. She was a known menace. And you were her protector." Robert Maxwell opened the binder. "Let me read you something, Martin," he said, his tone dangerously casual. "This is from a formal grievance filed by flight attendant Sophia Ramirez, dated May 12th, 3 years ago. Brenda constantly mocked my accent in the galley, telling me to speak English properly if I wanted to keep my job. She would assign me the most difficult tasks, and then berate me in front of other crew members. Does that sound familiar?" Webb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Intercrew friction is common. I remember speaking to both parties. I counseled Brenda on her approach." "Did you?" Amelia interjected. "Because this is your official, signed response to Ms. Ramirez's complaint. While Purser Jenkins's management style may be old school, the junior attendant needs to develop a thicker skin to handle the pressures of a demanding role." "You didn't counsel your bully, Mr. Webb. You gaslit her victim. Ms. Ramirez resigned 2 months later." Robert turned a page. "How about this one? David Chen, a flight attendant with us for 4 years. A complaint filed 2 years ago. He alleged that Brenda Jenkins made repeated jokes about him being an affirmative action hire and actively blocked him from serving in premium cabins, which impacted his pay. What was your conclusion on that one, Martin?" I would have to review the specifics," Webb stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Allow me," Robert said, reading from the page. "A thorough review found no evidence of discriminatory intent. The conflict stems from a personality clash. Both employees have been advised to maintain a professional distance." Mr. Chen resigned 4 months later. "Do you see the pattern here, Martin? A complaint is filed, you dismiss it, and a good employee leaves our company." Amelia leaned forward, her voice low and laced with contempt. "The question isn't just why you protected her. The question is why you sacrificed promising young talent to do so. But then, my team kept digging, and we found the answer." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of Brenda's fraudulent Cornell University diploma. "We know she was a fraud. We also know, from our archives, that you were her hiring manager 22 years ago. You brought her in. Her entire career was built on your initial, flawed judgment. Every complaint against her was a threat to you, wasn't it? An indictment of your own failure. So you buried them. You didn't protect a senior employee, Mr. Webb. You protected yourself. The truth, laid bare in the sterile quiet of the boardroom, was devastating. Webb sagged in his chair, the fight completely gone from him. He had been exposed, his career of negligent management culminating in this single, humiliating moment. By the end of the day, Amelia said, her voice a final verdict, you can either submit your resignation for gross negligence and dereliction of duty, or you will be terminated for cause. In either case, your career with Apex Air is over. Webb stared at the fraudulent diploma, a symbol of the lie he had spent years enabling. He gave a single defeated nod. But firing 2 people was not the solution. It was merely the excision of the most visible tumors. The underlying disease remained. 2 weeks later, Amelia Vance stood on a stage in a vast hangar at JFK, addressing a company-wide town hall broadcast to every Apex station around the globe. Thousands of employees watched as she spoke, not from a script, but from the heart. What happened on Flight 710 was not the failure of one employee, she told them, her voice echoing through the massive space. It was the failure of a culture that confused seniority with immunity, a culture that allowed whispers of harassment in the galley to be ignored until they became shouts of prejudice in the cabin, a culture that, somewhere along the way, forgot that our primary duty is not just safety, but basic human decency. That culture ends today. She announced the Horizon Initiative. It was a sweeping set of reforms. First, a new, completely anonymous reporting system managed by an independent ethics firm. From now on, if you speak up, you will be heard and you will be protected, she vowed. Retaliation will be a fireable offense, no exceptions. Second, she announced the rollout of mandatory immersive training workshops developed by leading sociologists and conflict resolution experts. It wasn't the usual boring corporate video. It involved role-playing, open forums, and frank discussions about unconscious bias. She declared that the entire executive team, starting with herself, would be the first to complete it. Third, and most powerfully, she spoke of reconciliation. She told the assembled employees about Sofia Ramirez and David Chen. Then she brought them out onto the stage. She publicly apologized to them on behalf of the entire company and announced that they had accepted her offer to return to Apex Air with their seniority and back pay fully restored. The hangar erupted in stunned, then thunderous applause. It was a gesture of accountability so profound it sent shockwaves through the organization. The message was clear. The old guard was out, and a new era of integrity had begun. Amelia personally mentored Grace Peterson, the young flight attendant who had witnessed the event. She saw in Grace not just a good employee, but a future leader. They met for coffee once a month, where Amelia shared stories of her own struggles as a woman of color in a male-dominated industry. Never let anyone's ignorance define your potential, she told Grace. Your integrity in that moment was worth more than Brenda's 22 years of fraudulent service. That's the quality that will change this airline. Under Amelia's guidance, Grace's confidence blossomed. She was soon promoted to a role helping to implement the new training programs, her own experience serving as a powerful testament to their importance. 6 months later, Dr. Amelia Vance was on an overnight flight to Tokyo. As she settled into her seat, she observed the cabin crew. A passenger in the row ahead, a flustered businessman, was being difficult, complaining loudly that the overhead bin space was full. In the old days, this might have been met with a forced smile and simmering resentment. Instead, the purser, a calm, middle-aged man, approached. He didn't placate or argue. He simply said, "Sir, I can see you're frustrated. It's a full flight. Let me personally find a spot for your bag, and once we're in the air, I will move it to a closer bin as soon as one becomes available. In the meantime, can I get you something to drink before we take off?" He de-escalated with empathy and professionalism. He solved the problem without sacrificing his dignity. Amelia watched the exchange, a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. This was the Horizon Initiative in action. It wasn't a memo or a slogan. It was a living, breathing change in behavior. The journey was far from over, but the ugly incident on Flight 710 had become more than just a shocking story. It had been the violent turbulence necessary to break through the storm clouds, leading the airline out of a toxic past and into a brighter, clearer sky. It was the beginning of a new horizon, one built not on seniority or prejudice, but on the simple, revolutionary idea of mutual respect. The story of Flight 710 is a stark reminder that a person's true character is often revealed at 38,000 feet in the isolated world of a pressurized cabin. It's a tale of how unchecked arrogance and prejudice can lead to a devastating downfall, and how true leadership is not just about running a company, but about upholding the dignity of every single person it serves. Brenda Jenkins learned the hard way that the world she had built on a foundation of lies and contempt could be brought crashing down by a single, quiet passenger who refused to be invisible. Her karma wasn't just losing a job, it was the complete and total unraveling of her life's deceit. This event forced an entire airline to look in the mirror and change for the better. What would you have done in Dr. Vance's position? What would you have done if you were Grace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final verdict.